Russian President Vladimir Putin has just addressed his country, thanking citizens for their unity following that aborted revolt by the Wagner mercenary group. Putin said that he will honor his promise to allow Wagner fighters to relocate to Belarus if they choose to. Belarus, of course, being where Wagner's commander, Yevgeny Prigozhin, has agreed to go. Or, Putin said, the Wagner mercenaries can also sign a contract to join the Russian army. He did not mention Prigozhin. Earlier, the mercenary leader said that his actions had highlighted weaknesses and mismanagement in Russia's national security. Let's listen in now to what the Russian president had to say just moments ago.
Today, you, the rebellious Wagner fighters and commanders, have the opportunity to continue your service for Russia by signing a contract with the Russian Defense Ministry or other military and law enforcement structures, or to go back to your family. Those who want can leave for Belarus. I thank those fighters and commanders of the Russian mercenary group Wagner who made the right decision and didn't choose bloodshed, but stopped at the last moment.
All right, we want to go now to our Russia analyst, Konstantin Agate. Konstantin, it's good to see you. So we just heard right there from Vladimir Putin, basically saying you've got a choice, Wagner men. You can either join our army or you can move to Belarus. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it means that Putin wants to softly disband the Wagner group and, well, probably later recreate it in some other form. But for now, he basically goes back to what was debated a week or 10 days ago, that all Wagner mercenaries have to sign contracts with the Ministry of Defense. This is what Prigozhin refused. But frankly speaking, Brent, going to Belarus, which to all intents and purposes under Alexander Lukashenko has turned into Russia's semi-colony, is not your safest place, frankly speaking, if you want to leave Russia. So all that is very, very raw, very, very half-cooked. And bearing in mind the fact that the presidential spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, announced just an hour and a half ago, actually, that Putin's speech will be historic, remembered in ages in history. This was very much a disappointment, and frankly, I'm just looking at my iPhone now all the time, looking at all the jokes that Russians are basically launching at popping at this strange speech.
And Putin, he did not mention Prigozhin at all in this video statement, and we don't know where Prigozhin is right now. I mean, do we know anything about his whereabouts? What are you hearing?
No, and although there are some rumors that he actually went to Belarus, but these are not confirmed at all, and Belarusian opposition people with whom I spoke just 2 hours ago said they know nothing. Again, if Prigozhin is going to Belarus, that's not the safest place for him to be, because Putin will remember him as a traitor. In this speech, he was never mentioned once by name. And this is very typical of Putin, who, wants to make it look as if everything is fine. We shouldn't talk about the past. But everyone remembers what Prigozhin did. And so I do not think it's the last act for him.
And on Saturday, when we saw Prigozhin with his mercenaries moving towards Moscow, there was practically no resistance from anyone. And yet we heard Vladimir Putin tonight praising the country for its unity. How unified is Russia right now?
Well, I mean, this is exactly the point of a lot of jokes I was reading before going on air. Especially if you remember the scenes from the city of Rostov-on-Don from the day before yesterday, with people actually threatened with the Wagnerites. I think that Putin desperately wants to put a good face on a situation which is actually very, very humiliating for him. I do not think, though, that this is the last we heard from him in these coming hours and days.
What about Alexander Lukashenko, the leader of Belarus? I mean, on Saturday, he was the unexpected mediator in this. I mean, what role is he really playing here?
Brett, we don't even know whether he mediated.
Right.
Putin and Lukashenko said they mediated, but there is nothing we know. Lukashenko promised to talk to reporters tomorrow. That's number one. Number two, he said, don't worry, it's not going to be anything sort of spectacular, if you wish. So we'll probably hear some version of events from him. But again, I'm not certain that Lukashenko was not paraded as a mediator just to save Putin's face, because for Putin to admit that he spoke and tried to convince of something, a man he called a traitor in the morning, just 7 hours after that, that is very humiliating. So probably Lukashenko was asked to intercede just to save Putin's face.
Asked to intercede, of course, probably had no choice but to do just that. Konstantin Ayert in Vilnius for us. Konstantin, it's always good to get your analysis. Thank you.
All the best.
Well, as we've been hearing, the man who launched the revolt in Russia and then suddenly called it off, he has spoken out in an audio message earlier today. Wagner group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin claimed that he wanted to protest the Russian government, not overthrow it. Wagner's short-lived revolt has left Moscow seeking to restore calm and reassert President Putin's authority. Many questions remain about how the dramatic events will inform his next steps and what they could mean for the war in Ukraine.
After a weekend of mayhem and revolt, Operation Save Face has kicked in at the Kremlin. It started with this video, released on Russian state TV, with Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu front and center. Seen apparently visiting the front line in Ukraine, it's his first public appearance since the Wagner revolt, and a clear signal that he's still in charge. And then came a call for unity from Russia's Prime Minister, who praised President Putin's leadership during a glum-faced cabinet meeting in Moscow.
Under these circumstances, it's important to ensure the sovereignty and independence of our country, the safety and well-being of our citizens. We need to act together as one team, maintain the unity of all forces by lining up behind the president, and take calculated joint decisions to implement tasks given by the head of state.
But despite the huge threat posed to his leadership by Wagner's march on Moscow, there was no mention of the weekend's turmoil in Vladimir Putin's first statement since it all ended. Instead, we got a video address released by the Kremlin in which he praises young engineers. The US and others have described Saturday's revolt as a direct challenge to the Russian president's leadership, but the Wagner leader and his forces have so far faced no punishment, despite Putin's clear anger. And as for Yevgeny Prigozhin himself, he's supposed to be in Belarus after pulling out with his troops on Saturday night. Whether he's arrived there yet is still unknown, but he has released an 11-minute audio message in which he explains his reasons for taking action.
There were two important factors for our decision to turn around. The first is that we did not want to spill Russian blood. The second is that we were marching to show our protest, but not to overthrow the government of the country.
All eyes will now be on the Kremlin and what President Putin does next, as questions grow over his grip on power and the Wagner group that has been critical to Russia's war in Ukraine.
And for more on this, I'm now joined by DW Russia analyst Emily Sherwin. She used to be DW's correspondent in Moscow because before authorities there shut down our bureau. Emily, we've heard the mercenary leader Prigozhin just released an audio message. You've listened to all of it. What can you tell us?
Yeah, it was an 11-minute voice message that he released on his Telegram channels. And I would say overall, the tone was very defiant and still pretty critical of the Russian government, despite the fact that Vladimir Putin over the weekend called Prigozhin, a traitor. So he said that he turned around his mercenaries to avoid further bloodshed. He said that the aim was to hold military leaders accountable for the mistakes that they had made in Ukraine, and that this whole march, as he called it, this whole mutiny essentially, had showed many security problems within Russia. He also said that one of the aims was to avoid the destruction of this mercenary group itself, because the army has recently said that it's trying to give contracts to mercenaries in the Wagner group by the 1st of July, essentially trying to bring the Wagner group into line. So that's what Prigozhin seems to be trying to avoid. He really also boasted, though, about the successes of the group and said that they're really, able fighters, that they would have taken Ukraine in 24 hours, rather, as he said.
Did that sound to you like a man who is about to disappear into the shadows?
It didn't. I would say it seems like this is a problem for Vladimir Putin. On the one hand, remains a problem. On the one hand, Prigozhin was keen to emphasize several times in this voice message that he was not trying to overthrow the leadership, as he said. He didn't mention Putin himself. So essentially kind of saying that he's loyal to Vladimir Putin. He was and has been always, it seems at least, Vladimir Putin's man. They've known each other for a very long time. We did have this very defiant tone, and Prigozhin mentioned several times that people on the route that the mercenaries took to Rostov and beyond Rostov cheered them. He said that people have been writing to the mercenaries now as well, saying, why didn't you keep going? Basically saying that the mercenaries had been showing up also the problems in the Russian government itself, including what he says is a bureaucratic state. So this is a really critical tone that doesn't seem to be one of a man who is, as you said, trying to vanish into the shadows.
He didn't say where he was, right?
He didn't say where he was. That's the big question. And there's actually a lot that's still up in the air, both when it comes to Prigozhin himself and also to his group. There was this criminal case that was opened against him and the mercenaries for basically launching an armed uprising. That was then dropped. The Kremlin said that Prigozhin would be going to Belarus. Today, there have been reports that maybe that case is actually still ongoing, but we don't really know. More and more, it does seem like the work of the mercenaries is not going to stop. Lavrov, the foreign minister, said today that the Wagner group would at least be continuing their operations in Africa, and Prigozhin didn't seem to think that the work was going anywhere. At least the mercenaries won't be going anywhere willingly, it seems.
Emily Sherbin there, Russia analyst, thank you very much.